Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I hope that you are very well. My name is Lizzie and today I've got my March wrap up. I read way more than I anticipated in March. I took part in the Tropical Readathon this month and I've taken part in this readathon in its August edition before because my Augusts are usually very quiet and my Marches are usually very busy. And this was a very busy March. And yet, I still managed to read loads of books. I was at work a lot, but I had a lot of downtime while at work. So I did manage to read quite a lot. So yes, read quite a lot. I will leave the readathon details in the description in case you would like to join in August. It's a really fun readathon. And we're going to get straight in because there's loads of books to talk about. But first I have a confession, which is I left a book off my February wrap up. I know, I forgot one. So I'm going to talk to you about that first and then we're going to get straight into the March books. So the forgotten book I read in February, and I can't believe I forgot this one because it was so much fun, is The Remarkable Retirement of Edna Fisher by E.M. Anderson. It's coming out this April. I'm a reviewer person thing for the publishing company, for the publishers, and it's just really great. So I wanted to give it a shout out. It's a fun fantasy. It takes a twist on the idea of a chosen one and who should be the chosen one. So it's basically, what if the chosen one was an 80-odd-year-old pensioner who is, enjoys a quiet life but also up for an adventure. It was really fun, had lots of unexpected twists and turns, really great sort of diverse cast. Just, yeah, it was great fun. So I thought I'd give it a shout out because I forgot to mention it in February. And let's get to my March books. So, as we're doing at the moment, I'm ranking my March reads. So I'm starting off with my least favourite book that I read in March and working my way up to the best book that I read in March. And as always, in the description, there's a list of how I got all these books, which ones are review copies, which ones are books I found in the wild. So yeah, just make sure to check that out if you would like to know which ones I got where. I feel like we need some kind of klaxon for this first one because it is my first 2-star read of 2023. I DNF books regularly. I only pick them up if I think I'll enjoy them, and if I'm not enjoying it, I just won't finish it. So it's very rare that I give out a low rating because it's very rare that I finish a book that I'm not enjoying. But I don't know, there was something about this one that I wanted to finish it so I could talk about why I didn't like it. And that is Cant, Resistor by Kiana Alexander. So this is a romance, a kind of second chance romance between two women who met very briefly at a high school dance. They had a sort of Cinderella moment and now they are reunited in their hometown, but they are on opposing sides of the demolition of a school to make way for office blocks, I think. It's kind of vague as to what's actually being built there. Basically, one of them is against gentrification and one of them works for the developers. Yeah, that's the only plot. They had no other conflict besides this, and it was really dragged out and not really resolved in a great way. The side characters were sort of there when they needed to be and otherwise there, so they would just sort of crop up. The Cinderella style story just felt ridiculous. It just felt weird. And I really didn't like the way that one of them discussed the other one's body in her inner monologue. Yeah, lots of things I did not like. I guess the romance was sweet in the end. By the end I was rooting for them. by the end. And there was something strangely compelling about this book, which is why it was 2 stars and not 1 star. Yes. That's my thoughts on that one. We have a big step up now to the next book in the 3-star zone, Only Ghouls and Horses by Dan Harris. This was great fun. It was a paranormal mystery and basically the title says it all. Very much in the comedic style of Only Fools and Horses, except it's about paranormal investigation. So, if you like either one of those two things, if you like both of those things, it's definitely a fun one. It's very short. it felt more like a pilot episode than like a whole book in itself. I think if you read all 4 books I believe are currently in the series, it would feel more like one long book rather than 4 separate books, would be my prediction. So yes, lots of things are really fun that I really enjoyed, lots of little twists, modern ideas on how paranormal investigation would go nowadays. So yeah, that was fun. Some characters I liked more than others. It was a fun read. Next up is Luca of the Night Forest by Taylor K. Mejia. And I have a scheduled review for this one. It's part of a book tour, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here. This is a fantasy adventure about Luca, who is going to save her mother and her sister by destroying the addictive drug that has become the whole economy of her local community and has really sort of torn it apart. So I really liked the premise and the fantasy world and the adventure kind of aspect of it. It was really creative, but also had a bit more grounding than a lot of other books, which I really, really enjoyed. The characters were I liked Luca, the rest of them weren't all that memorable. And the pacing was too fast paced. I was just whizzing through it, and I didn't have any sort of reason to slow down and enjoy it. And, you know, it went by too fast. The font is huge. So although it looks like a medium-sized book, it sort of almost felt not quite like a novella, but I would have liked more. You know, it's a fantasy world that deserved more padding, basically. So yes, that was my overview of this one. My full review is scheduled for, I want to say, the 15th of April, somewhere around there. Still in the 3-star zone, I listened to the audiobook of Inheritance of Shadows by A.L. Lester. And if you've been following my wrap-ups so far this year, you will know I've been working my way through the Border Magic / Lost in Time series. And I enjoyed this one. It wasn't my favourite entry into the series. It's the first one that's kind of expanding the universe, this paranormal historical universe. It's got a much more rural setting, which I did really like, a really sweet romance, and introduced some characters that I had actually come across in some other books I read, I don't know, 18 months ago now. So that was really nice. It was a nice kind of addition to the Border Magic series. Another audiobook, and this is the top 3-star. This is one where I wasn't sure if it should be a 3 or a 4, and that is Frontier by Grace, I've forgotten her name. Grace Curtis. It was fun, it was weird, it was wacky. Yes, mixed bag, this one. So it's a future apocalyptic world has been destroyed by global warming. The only people who still live on planet Earth are a sort of cult-esque religion who worship Gaia, the goddess of the earth. They worship the earth as their goddess, and so that's why they stayed on Earth. Very much kind of Western aesthetic and style, and it follows a stranger who arrives from outer space, crash lands on Earth, and has to leave. The first half of this book I really enjoyed. Lots of different vignettes of kind of going from one person to another, and all from different perspectives, which I really, really liked. And then halfway through, it took a weird turn, and I can't pinpoint the moment that it did. The second half of the book was just wild. It was a whole other book, the second half. It was just bonkers. So yeah, it kind of ended up being 3 stars because the first half was definitely a 4-star read and the second half was definitely a 2-star read. But I think a lot of people felt the opposite way, which is very interesting. What I will say, I listened to the audiobook. This is the slowest audiobook I have ever listened to. Like, I loved the accents and the kind of acting. I've only ever listened to audiobooks at default speed. And I sped this up. The first time I've ever sped up an audiobook, I sped it up to 1.5 and it still sounded like normal speech. That's how slow it was, that at 1.5 speed, it was normal speech. So just speed it up if you do listen to it. That's my tip. Just before you even start, just click 1.5 and it'll be a much easier listen. We are now in the 4-star zone, and this might be the best selection of 4-star books I've ever had in 1 month. So I've got 4 4-star reads here, and 3 of them were on the cusp. 3 of them were the kind of, would have been 5 stars except for this one thing. So ranking them was really, really difficult, but it's a great selection of books. So first up is Between Before and After by Jessica Stilling, and this follows a filmmaker. He is adapting his mother's novels that are set in Paris, and he's in the process of adapting a book that's kind of semi-autobiographical and includes the death of a young girl that mirrors the death of his sister. So he's reliving this childhood, reliving this trauma, and starting to piece together that things don't quite add up as to the nature of her death. It was very slow paced for the first kind of 3 quarters with lots of different plot lines, but then they all came together in a very sort of emotional, a heart-wrenching way. And the last quarter of this book, I was a wreck. I was an absolute wreck. And because of the different layers of artifice going on here, so, you know, the main character is a filmmaker, his mother is a novelist, the two of them communicate via their art, really. That's how they communicate with the world, how they process their thoughts and feelings. And that was just such an intriguing way to explore these characters' stories. Next up on the 4 stars is Fake Dates and Mooncakes by Shirley. And I mean, the second that I found out about this book, I was like, yes, I need to read this. And then it came up on NetGalley and I was like, yes, give it to me. It was so much fun. It was so sweet. So there's Dylan and Theo. Dylan works for his aunt's takeaway and he sees a competition for teen bakers to make mooncakes, and he decides he's going to enter it to win the prize money and the kind of exposure and advertising for his aunt's takeaway that they're hoping to turn into a full restaurant. In comes the obscenely rich Theo, who wants to kind of help Dylan out, but also, classic fake dating, needs a date for his cousin's wedding. So you've got baking competitions, you've got fake dates to weddings. What more could you want? It was really enjoyable. The romance was very, very sweet. One thing I really, really enjoyed is both of the main characters were out from before the story, and it was never really raised. I talked about Can't Resist Her at the start of this video, and one of the things I didn't like about that book is how whenever the characters talked about their coming out, their straight relatives would discuss it in the most cliched way. Like there's one point where one of the main characters, she is talking to her dad and talking about the moment that she first told him she had a crush on a woman, and he goes, I remember feeling how proud I was that you trusted me with that moment. No one talks like that. And that wasn't in this book, and I really appreciated it, that they're just out. It's never even mentioned as something slightly unusual. They're just living their lives. It's never once mentioned or addressed that this is not a heterosexual relationship. And I really appreciated that. That's not to say that coming out stories don't have their place. Of course they do. We need a mix of different things. And I really liked that this one very much took the joy and optimistic worldview perspective. That being said, I did not like the way that money was handled in this book. So as I mentioned, Theo is obscenely rich, like obscenely rich. And he pays for so much stuff in this book. And at the start, it makes Dylan very uncomfortable because it would. And at the end, it was a romantic gesture. And I can't really discuss it without spoiling it. I really want to just walk up to people and be like, if someone did this as a romantic gesture, would you think it's romantic or just weird and a rich people problem, you know? So yes, I had some queries about how that was dealt with, but the romance itself was very, very sweet. Another 4-star read, The Heartbeat of a Million Dreams by Halo Scott. And I don't know what I expected going into this. It was very, very different from whatever it was I expected, and I loved it. Again, very apocalyptic. We're set on a future on Mars where there's a sort of colony on Mars and war is going on, and some people, some sort of subsets are being blamed for the war. So the main character, Slade, she kind of is always on the run, always avoiding people attacking her or wanting to arrest her. And it's about her finding her place and her sort of finding her truth. Sounds cheesy, but it's what the book is. And it had a very epic feel to this book, even though it's quite short. It's less than 200 pages, but it had a very epic, adventurous feel to it. There was a very moving sapphic romantic arc, and also sort of commentary on neurodivergence, which I thought was really well represented. And yeah, just loads and loads of really great things. The only thing that kind of let it down for me is I felt like the emotional climax came too early. So then the rest of the book I was just kind of like, you know, I checked out emotionally by that point from this book. But there was still more to go. And I just kind of wanted to be present in it right to the end. And the final 4-star, and this was so close to a 5-star, I spent ages deliberating, is King's Rise by Anne Matthias. And this one came out yesterday from when I'm filming this. Really, really recommend. It was so much fun. It's Arthurian legend, but also police procedural. Like, if you enjoyed the Rivers of London books and or BBC Merlin, this is the one to read. It's set in a small town where nothing really happens, but some teenagers have, on Halloween, been kind of messing around with the ancient ruins in the town, and suddenly Arthurian characters are turning up being nearly dead, and the main character, who is a detective, has to get to the bottom of it. There were so many Easter eggs for Arthurian legend. It was a really great sort of twist on the legends. The sibling relationships in this book were so good. I loved them so much. Yeah, it was really, really great. It's very long, and it mostly doesn't feel long. Towards the end it did start to drag, which is where it sort of became a 4-star read for me, that the end just felt a little bit stretched out. And one of the storylines towards the end, I was sort of raising my eyebrows at a bit, but so much fun. Really, really great fun. We have an honourable mention before we get into the 5-star books, and that is a reread of The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. I read this for my book club. It's our book club pick for these 2 months, and I listened to the audiobook. It is even wilder than I remember it being, and I had a great time. This was definitely a booktube darling back in the day. Everyone was obsessed with it when it first came out. You couldn't move for discussion of it. And I think it was very misrepresented. Or not misrepresented. I think that because it's a historical fiction about a queer character and a queer relationship, that became the selling point. But that's kind of an overarching emotional character journey, whereas the actual plot is like an international adventure heist. There's pirates, there's highwaymen, there's like sinking islands in Venice, there's alchemists, there's so much going on. It's a proper adventure story that has a queer romance as part of it. That is how I would describe it. So yes, that's A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. On to the 5-star reads, and just like how lots of my 4-star reads were really, really excellent 4 stars, some of these 5-star books, oh my goodness. So the first of the 5-star reads I'm going to talk about is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. So I watched The Dropout on Disney Plus at the start of this year, and I was obsessed with it. I don't know how I'd never heard of any of this before. I must have been living under a rock when all the Theranos stuff went down, but I was obsessed with the show and immediately bought the book. This is written by the journalist who sort of exposed Theranos for the fraudulent company that it was, and this is his sort of more fleshed out account. More people came forward since he published his first article. Some people gave up their anonymity since he published the article. So it's much more kind of in-depth look at all the different aspects of this company. I will say that if I was reading this having never heard of Theranos, I would be very confused. It does assume some knowledge, and it's just kind of a more in-depth look. But I think the knowledge it assumes you could get from a Wikipedia article or a couple of YouTube videos. So yes, if you are interested in the Theranos, I still don't know how to say it. It's weird to say in a British accent. She's like Theranos. Theranos. That's how she says it. Theranos. If you are interested in Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, then this is one to read. It was such a struggle ranking these 5-star books because they're all so good. But the next one I'm going to talk about is Catherine Parr, The Sixth Wife by Alison Weir. And again, I will make this very brief because I did a whole video on the whole series, which you can watch. I will put the link in the description. And yes, this is a fiction novel about Catherine Parr's life. Completed the series, very, very much enjoyed it. I think she is a very, not underrated, that's not the word I'm looking for, but she's an often looked over figure of history. She was a very influential woman in terms of our actual history, you know. She was very influential on Edward VI. She was very influential on Elizabeth I. She was a big figure in Protestant reform, and, you know, she's often overlooked in terms of the impact that she had on British history. So it was really great to read this book. Then we have The Clockwork Girl by Anna Mazzola. I loved this book. I don't know why I've been putting it off for ages, and I went into it kind of like, I guess it will be fun. I hope I enjoy it. I'm not worried about maybe DNFing it if I didn't enjoy it. But oh my goodness, this book was so good. It is set in Paris during Louis XVI's reign, and the main character, Madeleine, she is the daughter of a madam who runs a brothel, and she is kind of coerced into investigating a maker of clockwork animals. There is something sinister going on, children are going missing, and she is kind of all caught up in the midst of it. And what I will say with this book, I think it's best to go in not actually knowing much beyond that. I would really encourage reading it because it takes so many twists and turns. It's very creepy. Like, it gave me lots of the heebie-jeebies in a good way, I guess, when you're reading. It's not fantasy. It's not fantasy at all. It is marked as fantasy on Goodreads because loads of people have put it on their fantasy shelf. It is not fantasy. There is no magic in this book at all. Not even a little sprinkling of magical realism or urban fantasy. Nothing. No magic. I spent so long deliberating between these two books as to which one would be my best book of the month. But in second place, we have Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju. And I did not know really what to expect with this book. I knew it's obviously been translated from Korean and that it's a sort of feminist work of fiction. And for most of the book, I was like happily reading it and enjoying it, and it just follows the life of a woman who is trying to have a baby and a career and finding that the world is, by the world I mean the patriarchy, is not letting that happen. She has to battle for maternity leave. She watches the women in her company get pushed out. One thing that I did really, really like in this book is that there are footnotes. There are citations. Whenever Ji-young or one of the other characters makes a statement about gender inequality, there is a citation to prove that they are telling the truth. And on one level, I love that. On another, it makes me very sad that we need that. I sort of wish that we didn't need it. But I like that that's there. I think it's a really good addition. So most of the book, I'm just there kind of reading it, you know, agreeing with, nodding my head along and going, oh, it's really terrible, you know, the stuff that she has to go through. And then the epilogue was just so frustrating in a good way. Like, I wanted to throw the book across the room with frustration. And just read it. The last two lines just perfectly encapsulate the frustration that this book is about. Obviously I can't spoil it, so I'm just going to say just read it. Read it. And so finally, the best book that I read in March. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I finally read it and I have a lot of thoughts. It was very good, very weird, very good. Got a lot of thoughts. I'm not going to go too in depth here because this is the 16th book I'm telling you about in this video. You are probably fed up of my voice by now. I know I'm fed up of my voice by now, so I'm going to save it for another time to go really in depth into my thoughts on this book. It reminded me a bit of Wuthering Heights in that it's very atmospheric and it's about terrible people doing terrible things. Which is a weird comparison, I think, but I think it holds up just in those two regards. That it's atmospheric and it's about terrible people doing terrible things. And the way you are brought on this journey with these people as they become increasingly terrible and do increasingly terrible things is genius. I really, really enjoyed it. And one thing that it did get me thinking about is dark academia as a whole. That this book is often sort of hailed as, the dark academia book. And that sort of baffles me a bit. Because this book is a critique on people like that who glorify old institutions and are obsessed with mythology and learning for the sake of learning and shutting yourself away from the world, to the point that all sort of morals start to get murkified, muddied. Morals get muddied by academia, which I feel like is a romanticised cornerstone of dark academia as an aesthetic, etc., which is a whole other thing to discuss. And it just intrigued me that you could finish reading this book and be like, yes, I want to do that. That really intrigued me. But also I kind of get it. I do kind of get it. So yes, very strange, very dark, truly brilliant. We made it! We finally made it. I hope this video isn't too long. I've been filming here for ages, but I think I can hopefully edit it down into something digestible. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you read in March. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. Have a lovely week and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.